What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video. And on my channel, we mainly talk about the Modern and Pioneer format for a few different reasons. One, I think that they're probably the most popular constructed format in Magic. Obviously excluding Commander, because I think Commander is probably just the most popular format in general. But I think as far as like 60 card constructed formats, I think Modern and Pioneer are, like a 1 and 2, arguably like Pioneer has been catching up on Modern, because up until recently, I think Pioneer was just a little bit more enjoyable to play than the current Modern format. But as of right now, and this is a person that absolutely loves the formats, this is kind of like part two, I'm absolutely in love with both of these formats. I think that for a while, at least for, Pioneer and Modern, that there were a lot of thinky matchups where, the decisions that you made on like the first few turns of the game absolutely impacted like turn 10 to 15 on, getting to that point and just being able to kind of make correct predictions and things like that. It was just a very much like feel smart formats where it felt like, instead of studying like Nadu loops or something like that, or, just making sure that you have like your Wrath of the Skies on like turn 3 with a bunch of extra energy saved up to clear the board. It felt like games were a lot more interactive, that, yes, that you had the potential to be ran over, but it really didn't happen that often. And there was some good counterplay. And, while I don't think it's completely absent from the Modern format now, and I'm definitely sound like a boomer when I say this, but it definitely felt like when we had a little bit more of a powered down like Modern format, it did feel a lot grindier. That said, usually when like the metagames and stuff get solved and we don't have like an almost tier 0 deck in the format, I think those matchups kind of return, and I would expect to see that, kind of once we get to this banned and restricted announcement. And speaking of the banned and restricted announcement, it's got a lot of pressure. It's got a lot of weight on its shoulders, if I'm being honest with you, because it could single-handedly fix the problems of both formats. And we're going to talk about each format individually and exactly kind of what the issue is, I think, from like the community as a whole, and ultimately like what my issue with it is currently, because as someone who I've played through some pretty bad modern metagames, I played through some pretty toxic Pioneer metagames, and I am probably the least motivated to like play these formats or play any like real serious matches of Magic in either of these formats, just with some of the potentials that could take place with that ban and restricted announcement being so close, and essentially all but knowing that there is going to be changes made to one or multiple formats. It seems like Modern is like the only one as of right now where there's like a guarantee that like we are going to get something hit from it, potentially unbanned as well. But of course, before we talk about Modern Pioneer and kind of talk about the problems that, I have with the format, and really probably the community at large has with the format, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me, where, like I said earlier, I talk a lot about the Modern and Pioneer format, and I make some other longer form videos, such as this one, that may or may not also pertain to the Modern format. So if any of that interests you, please consider subscribing, ring the notification bell, all that fun, happy stuff. It's a great, easy way to support me and my content as we try to get to 1,000 subscribers, and y'all are amazing. I say it, I think I say it in like every video, but I absolutely love the support. It keeps me going, and helps me to like try to like elevate, like what's the next level, like what's the next thing I can do, short of, hiring a whole team of people to like help me produce like banger content and whatever, and being able to quit my job. But who knows, maybe that's in the future and you'd see a lot more of me. So some people, that'd be a good or a bad thing. But with all that said, again, thank you. I really do appreciate all the support. But let's go ahead. We'll start with the Pioneer format first, and then we'll move on to Modern. So before I really get into my point with the Pioneer metagame, and I will make it hopefully very quickly, I am known to ramble, as it turns out. This is the Pioneer metagame from the last 365 days, so that takes us back to August of 2023. And so a lot of this does make sense. If you remember kind of going into that regional championship in Atlanta in December to the Pro Tour Murders of Karlov Manor, which took place like a few months later, I believe. We had Izzet Phoenix, Rakdos Midrange, Azorius Control were the top decks of the format, full stop. I remember people talking about Rakdos Midrange, where we needed something like probably Fable the Mirror Breaker ban, because it's just one of the on power, on rate, probably one of the best cards in the Pioneer format. And at the time was seeing plenty of modern play as well. So it was kind of the go-to card for Rakdos midrange, at least to kind of get banned out of it for a few reasons. And of course, as you can kind of see on your screen, this Rakdos midrange deck is also doing the Rakdos Vampires thing of Saurian Imperious Bloodlord plus Vein Ripper, which is absolutely nuts if that tells you how good that combo is. But, Rakdos midrange, Fable the Mirrorbreaker kind of solved a lot of its problems. It would just be able to ditch the cards it didn't need in the matchup to eventually find cards that it would need, or at least like effective spells that will actually do something in certain matchups. Izzet Phoenix, a lot of its like innovations and things like that have helped the deck to become more consistent, kind of make it more than just put a bunch of birds in your graveyard, bring them back. Sometimes you end up playing the Ledger Shredders and potentially beating down with them, to, some of the decks playing Proph's Eidetic Memory to kind of make its like Picklock Pranksters even as threatening threats, and kind of, being less, I would say, all in on the, bringing back of the Phoenixes, even though it does do it very well. And of course, Azorius Control is Azorius Control. Now, kind of the cool thing I would say out of this is the fact of like how popular Rakdos Vampires and Abzan Amalia combo is, because even though Izzet Phoenix, Rakdos midrange, and Azorius Control, for probably the full 365 at one time or another, you could have argued it was one of the best decks in the format to play, at least top 3 best decks to play. Of course, we know that when we had Pro Tour Mirrors of Call of Manor, and then kind of the subsequent aftermath of that, Rakdos Vampires took over Rakdos Midrange's spot as like the best Rakdos deck in the format, and only recently did Rakdos Midrange start to really kind of make a comeback, and is, I believe, pretty high up in the metagame right now. Of course, Izzet Phoenix having its own innovations, Amalia just getting better and better to the point where it got a specific mention in the last BNR about just being able to draw games and draw out a lot of matches and things like that. Even though I think it's becoming less and less of a thing now, I think it's more kind of the fact that it has the option to do it itself, to kind of win a game that it was going to lose more than likely, to either stall out the match, and if you win the game 1, then you just never have a second game finish, then you just end up winning the match in that case. Obviously, all this being said, like this is what the metagame looks like. When you have the last 365 days of data, this is all the major paper events. It's basically every single challenge and, preliminary and, league that could possibly end up showing up here. So with that said, this is the metagame from, if my computer will decide to work, from the last 30 days. I was going to do like the last 2 weeks, but the numbers were definitely ridiculous. But I decided to do it from the last 30 days. This is the last month, all right? So we still have Izzet Phoenix, Rakdos Midrange, Azorius Control, Amalia combo, and Rakdos Vampires as, still the top 5 decks. Obviously, shuffled around a little bit more, but we can kind of see a huge problem here. So we saw that Izzet Phoenix over the course of, a year has a 13.4% of the meta, and then you have all the other decks, you have 8.8%, 8.6, 7.3, 6.5. Awesome. I even think there were some decks past that were like at 5%, like 5.5% to just under 5%. So like 7-8 decks that, had around a 5% or more metagame share, which I would say is pretty good. I'd say that there's definitely some decent diversity. Of course, people always want more, basically like whatever deck they want to play, they want it to be playable. And, that's something that we could try to strive for in Magic. But I think when you have like a metagame with 5 to 7 decks that are all like roughly in the same range as far as like the metagame share, of course, like I'm not saying like 5% is close to 13.5%. I'm saying that, like, that's still a reasonable amount of people like playing the deck and having results with it. So when we look at this 30-day metagame, which essentially goes from like the last month, we have Rakdos Vampires at almost a 30%, and Abzan Amalia combo at 17%, and Izzet Phoenix at 11.5%. By doing some quick math here, essentially like 13 plus 17 plus 11, I mean, we have like a 47, like 58% of the metagame is one of those 3 decks. And the fact that we have a 58% of the metagame is, either vampires, Amalia combo, or Izzet Phoenix, over half of those three are Rakdos vampires, and its percentage just keeps moving up. I actually think if you go to I think it's 17 or the last week, the last week or 2 weeks, it's over 30% of the metagame. And the fact that these decks for a long time were very close to each other, where, at one time one of them would have maybe 12, 13%, the other one would have 11%, the other one 10. They'd all be in the double digits, and they'd all be really close. They'd be within 100 decks of each other, which for the last 30 days is pretty impressive, for there to be maybe 80 to 100 deck difference between Rakdos Vampires or Amalia or Izzet Phoenix to whatever deck was in third. Well, now we have Rakdos Vampires, which has more decks being played right now just in that archetype than the next two combined. I even think if you go a little bit farther too, 17, I guess not really including Rakdos midrange, but the next two most played decks don't have as many decks being played, or at least placing or getting results that we do with Rakdos Vampires. And it's pretty crazy because this is already kind of a toxic metagame where we have, two decks that are kind of going over that 15% threshold, and even, kind of slowly becoming a 2-deck format where Izzet Phoenix kind of, I think, lags behind a little bit, compared to the growth that these decks are now having, almost a year of being in the metagame. And I just slapped my microphone, so I'm sorry for that. So this is kind of my big gripe right now of the Pioneer metagame. I mean, it's to the point where Rakdos midrange is coming back up in usage, but it's literally playing the same package that the Rakdos Vampires deck is playing. Obviously, Sorin Imperious Bloodlord is a little bit worse in Rakdos midrange because there's technically less vampires being played in it, but it's still kind of the same premise where, you're playing Sorin because you can put Vein Ripper into play on turn 3, and a lot of decks really can't handle that, and if you try to play against other mid-range decks, they just get to use their removal, kill your creatures, temple you with some life gain, and then they're going to be able to, win races kind of in that way, and of course hit you for tons of damage as well, short of just being able to, for Izzet Phoenix, put all your Phoenixes into play, get Prophesy Memory going, or using Amalia combo to go off on turn 3. Their best draws, are the only ways to beat Rakdos midrange and Rakdos Vampires middling draws. Basically the thing that they're going to get to do with quite a bit of regularity, and they have different tools to kind of interact with all the matchups and stuff when you have removal spells for the Abzan Amalia deck, and even Thoughtseize as well, and then of course Thoughtseize for the Izzet Phoenix decks, and then removal spells, which Prophesy Memory is a little bit weaker to spot removal for the fact that you have to target something to put the counters on it. So once you kind of target it, your opponent just ends up killing it. Well, then you don't get any counters from all the cards that you drew that turn. So it's kind of a blowout there. Of course, the high risk, high reward, where you have Sorin, you don't have a Vein Ripper, you have Vein Ripper, don't have Sorin, whatever. That just seems to be kind of a better place to be than, if you're playing Prophetic Memory and you don't have a creature, or you don't have ways to effectively mill cards in the Izzet Phoenix deck, or you're playing the Amalia deck and you don't have Amalia or Wild Growth Walker, Amalia with just random life gain creatures, or maybe a Dina to where you can try to drain your opponent, is a decent strategy, but you need, at least a few different moving parts, and then additional creatures as well, where, with Sorin, there is a little bit more of, things that you can do with it that aren't just, leaving it dead in the water, or just kind of doing an okay kind of thing. And Vein Ripper very much is a card that these decks can cast, on turn 6. With the Fable of the Mirror Breaker, you're able to kind of, again, get rid of the dead cards, find cards that you need. More than likely, you're going to end up drawing lands. So, as kind of the mid-range deck anyway, you want to make sure that you hit your land drops. And again, just hard casting a Vein Ripper is not the worst thing in the world. Obviously not ideal when you can put it into play on turn 3 or at any other time. Essentially pay 3 mana to put a Vein Ripper into play, and then be able to leave up your mana to do other things. Again, from the amount of interaction, the kinds of interaction that both Rakdos variants have, it's not like, it's not the worst thing in the world. It's not impossible. So you just play it in a top deck war, and your opponent is not going to effectively have an answer for it right away, and it's going to get in a ton of hits, and it's going to end the game very quickly. So that's kind of like my gripe right now of the Pioneer metagame, is that there needs to be changes. Like, not only are Amalia and Rakdos Vampires, just slowly breaking away from the pack, like, there was already a 3-deck pack that was ahead of everybody else and was pretty far ahead of everyone else. Well, now they're leaving the third one behind, and the two of them are going off, and then not only is that third one getting left behind, the second one is now getting left behind, and we have a very much a clear best deck, where I think where Rakdos mid-range was like the best deck, because it just had like kind of a 50-50, maybe 55-45 matchup, give or take, in either direction of most of the metagame. I think Rakdos Vampires just has a very good matchup against everything else, and the fact that instead of like its matchups being 50-50 and depending on what half of the deck you draw, I think that Rakdos Vampires, just with having that kind of package in it plus the interaction, just makes it so much better on average than what these other decks are doing. Like, yeah, sure, like Amalia and Izzet Phoenix can be a lot more explosive, but at the end of the day, if you're only that explosive 50-60% of the time, but you're able to be, very much like this super interactive, like still good against, the other most played decks in the format, and in a lot of matchups, you just have like a kind of an I win button, at your disposal that just fits into your general game plan, and that works, maybe as much, if not more, than the other two, then why not just play that deck? And just, kind of study the format and, be proficient in how you sequence things and how you decide to kind of do things. I guess it's kind of the same thing as sequencing, but you get my point. When you have a lot of knowledge of the format that you're playing, this is kind of where the mid-range decks and like the, Rakdos Vampires decks, like the players end up shining, is how much they know the format and how they're able to effectively use their resources to get the most out of it. And I think that now at this time, I think it would be the perfect time. You just hit all the top decks. You probably hit, Sorin. You probably leave Vein Ripper in the format. You probably hit, like Wild Growth Walker, because I think there's some actual like really cool Amalia things that you can do, where I think if you just, gain, life 18 times and get to the, the Wrath naturally, I think that's totally fine. Izzet Phoenix, like just get rid of Treasure Cruise. That card is so busted. It is so good. And, it definitely makes the decks a lot weaker as well if they don't get an Ancestral in their deck, where it's essentially the only deck that gets to play it or even really wants to play it. Rakdos midrange, just playing Fable the Mirror. It's the best card in the format. It's the only reason to, play red in your midrange decks, and I think that's like what Rakdos Vampires like splashes for, is like maybe a sideboard red card or sideboard red cards, and then a Fable the Mirrorbreaker. Of course, it has Bloodtithe the Harvester as well, but like Fable the Mirrorbreaker is like, that's it. That's the thing going on. Azorius Control, like whatever. Like, people can talk about Control being like really good in the format, and I think you have to be a very good player to make Control be a very good deck, and I think that's kind of the case here right now in Pioneer. I think Control, assuming that, even half the changes that I listed or even one of those changes happen, I think Azorius Control can be a little bit better in the format, because I think wide open when people are still trying to figure it out, I think just playing Control strategies are totally fine, because I think the overall knowledge, I think people just have like the, they're in general, their experiences to kind of go off of in that case. So I think Azorius Control can kind of get people that way. But in either case, I think those are the changes that have to happen to the Pioneer format right now for it to kind of be less miserable. And I think that's enough changes anyhow to where we just kind of completely reset the metagame. There is no, well, you eliminated the best deck, now the second becomes the first and the third becomes the second, anything like that, or the third becomes the first, whatever the case may be. We're not just going to shuffle around the top decks of the format until we get to another BNR, and then we hit the second one, and then we hit the third one. No, I think we just kind of start clean slate, where most of these decks are still playable. They still kind of get to do their thing. Rakdos Vampires probably the most to lose, because without Sorin, then you might as well just play Rakdos midrange. And Rakdos midrange was already kind of a decent deck anyway, so you still have, a Rakdos midrange deck in the format, but now they don't have the Sorin combo, and then they don't have Fable of the Mirrorbreaker ideally also, so they're playing maybe not even more fair because it is a mid-range deck, but there is less of the, shuffling cards around and just being able to play like, okay, like they definitely have to commit a little bit more to playing creature removal or playing, more discard spells, whatever the case may be, because now they just don't have that card in their deck that's going to say, okay, these discard spells are bad right now, I'm going to ditch them and I'm going to look for more lands, I'm going to look for creatures, anything like that. Is it Phoenix, just gets to do the thing maybe a few times, like 2 or 3 times in a match, and then like once you kind of answer it for the third time, then they kind of run out of steam. Of course, that's just like the theory of it, because when you are playing, ways to copy the spells that you cast, and you're casting Treasure Cruise right after that, and you're drawing 6 cards, even just getting to draw 3 cards is amazing. And of course, some of the other synergies that you have with drawing cards in the deck, I think just hitting that card makes Is It Phoenix in general a weaker deck, to the point where I think it's a little bit more fair, where it's like, okay, you can get a bunch of Phoenixes back, once, twice, maybe 3 times, but after that it is going to be increasingly harder, and you're not going to be able to do it on back-to-back turns. You're more than likely only going to be able to do it once, and then you're going to have to take a turn off, and then you're going to have to do it again, and then probably take a few turns off, everything like that. And of course, Amalia combo, as we know it now, would not exist. We wouldn't have essentially a 2, or I guess really a 3 card like infinite combo, if you will, that will blow up the board and then you hit your opponent for 20. I think having Amalia still legal in the format is totally fine. I think that there's a lot of cool strategies with it, as I stated. I just don't think you need the instant like I win button anymore. That also leads to drawing games, and you kind of solve that problem there. So yeah, that's my thoughts, opinions, whatever on the Pioneer metagame and the changes that need to be made to Pioneer to kind of shake it up. We have a regional championship coming in October. So with the banned and restricted announcement being towards the end of August, and again with the potential changes being made to Pioneer, I think that this would kind of shake up the format pretty well. We are going to have another set that releases like a week or 2 before the regional championship as well. So it's going to be a fresh format for people to kind of test in and practice and play up until the new set comes out. And then, there's potentially minor changes and minor upgrades as people kind of comb through the set and try to find ways to upgrade the current archetypes that exist in the format, while potentially looking for new ones to kind of bring to that regional championship as well. So I think in general, I think this banned and restricted announcement, depending on how deep it goes and how deep that Wizards is willing to go, we could end up with a dramatically different format than what we have now. And whether you think it's for better or for worse, I think we can all agree that there needs to be some amount of changes made to the Pioneer format, and I would absolutely love to see some or all of those changes implemented. So that's going to do it for me in the Pioneer metagame. Let's go ahead and shift gears and look at the Modern metagame, which I think is suffering from a little bit of a different problem from what the Pioneer metagame is experiencing. So while there is an issue, I think right now with Boros Energy now kind of slowly turning the corner, and I think being a deck that might just be too good for the format, I think energy cards are starting to get way too good for the format. Probably were already too good to begin with, but I think that there is a more glaring problem kind of going on right now in the Modern format, and that is Nadu. Now, I've had multiple videos like comparing this to some of the best decks that we've seen in the history of Modern. I don't think it's only the best deck in the current Modern metagame right now. It is up there with things like Hogak, with the Eldrazi aggro decks, with the Splinter Twins, the Birthing Pods. It's one of the best Modern decks of all time. And the one thing that it has over all the other Modern decks of the greatest of all time that it has over those is the fact of how complicated this deck is. Now look, any deck that you play has its own complicated lines. It has things that are pretty big brain plays that, I think in general the average player is not going to see. Heck, even I'm not going to see it, and I'll like overanalyze and like dig through deck lists and just try to find any possible synergy that I can on like the second or third level of like a deck. And I think with Nadu, the fact that the way it wins the game is kind of going through a loop where you essentially Boseiju all of your opponent's non-basic lands. You only leave them with basics in play. Some of those decks, it's going to be one, maybe sometimes two. You bounce all of their permanents, you flood the board full of 1/1s, and then you just pass the turn, and then your opponent obviously can't deal with 500 or whatever arbitrarily large number of tokens that you've put into play off of 2 basic lands, unless they're somehow mountain and swamp and Rakdos Charm in hand, and then you just obviously don't have a way to counter it, or whatever the case may be. Whatever it may be, either way, like where we're at right now with Nadu is the fact that it's not fun to play. It's not fun to play against. It's kind of a tournament nightmare as well, because I watched a tournament where Nadu was the feature match, and it went to time, which no big deal. Matches of Magic, go the full 50 minutes. And then you obviously get, you finish that turn, and then you get 5 additional turns, essentially meaning that each player gets 3 turns to try to win the game, or at least to have come to some conclusion of the game. And I remember sitting there watching, and the round timer, I think, got to over 30 minutes. So we were already, we played 50 minutes, and then we had another 30 minutes of Magic being played, or at least what people would call Magic. It's like the Nadu player trying to figure out how to beat Rakdos Charm, when it's pretty impossible for them to beat Rakdos Charm with kind of like how their board was set up, because they were just going to make too many tokens. They wouldn't be able to bounce enough tokens after kind of going through their Nadu loop and everything. And it took probably 5-10 minutes after that happened to solve the issue, and then they had to pair the round and actually get everybody set up. So by the time the time on round was called, and then the actual conclusion of this and the start of the next round, it was like almost a full round behind schedule. And that's just crazy. And then the games and like the rounds kept going longer and longer, because most of the time it was like Nadu players still playing the game, because again, like their board positions and how they set things up and how things end up getting set up is very complicated. Yes, it does have some very straightforward setups where it's like, oh, turn 1 I played a Dork, turn 2 I played Springheart and Tuco, turn 3 I played a Nadu, and I had like Shuko in play, or I was able to play Nadu and then play Shuko, and it's like, okay, I have 5-6 creatures in play, I have 12 looks at it. At that point, it's basically deterministic. I say basically because with like that rate, like you could in theory fizzle from there, but it's just very unlikely, and that's kind of the problem with some of the other decks that were, like Second Sunrise was a deck that was played in Modern that was so boring. It made one of the worst Pro Tours ever to watch. And as someone who's watched, old coverage of, previous Pro Tours from like, the Return to Ravnica era, and even going farther back. And then, of course, even, in this era that we live in now, that was one of the most boring Pro Tours to watch, like ever. One of the most boring top 8s to watch. Watching Stanislav Sivka breathe very loudly into a microphone that was probably way too close to him to begin with, and just watching him combo with a deck that in theory, if something was done in the wrong order, you could potentially lose the game. And then also, if certain conditions were met, no matter what, you could also lose the game. So you had to sit there and watch kind of everything unfold, because there was a possibility that your opponent actually couldn't win the game, even though they were in the middle of going off. And that's just if things like ended up being in like the wrong order, which is absolutely insane. And technically there is that fail rate with Nadu, which also makes it not very fun, because like you can't even just say like your opponent like assembles all the things and then you're like, okay, we can move on. Like, just show me that you know how to combo. and we can move on with life, and then show me your win condition, whatever the case may be. Technically, that doesn't happen with the Nadu deck, and there's so many just dumb things to do with this bird. On top of that, too, if you just play a second one, you just get to do it all over again, which at that point I think becomes like essentially deterministic to actually go through deterministic to actually go through your deck and, you know, find all your lands, find your Sylvan Safekeeper, be able to establish your loop, things like that. The deck is very complicated. It takes way too long for a lot of players to play it, and it's the best deck, so then at that point, like, people pick it up and play it, and it's like, yeah, like, most of my games are probably gonna be straightforward anyway, and then they're not, and then we go 20-30 minutes over round, and then you do that for a 5, 6, 7, 8 round tournament, and then you're there for, you know, when the top 8 would normally be starting right now, you're finishing the second to last round, and you still have the last round plus the top 8 to actually play. And, you know, like I said, you know, we talked about the numbers. You know, we've seen the results from Nadu where we've had plenty of pretty big tournaments, you know, 10Ks and whatnot, where we've seen, you know, Nadu in over half the top 8 decks. And of course, you know, winning Pro Tour Modern Horizons 3. There was the SCG 10K that took place, I believe, a weekend or two ago. And just ended up like putting, I believe, like 5 decks in the top 8. And eliminating all the other non-Nadu decks in the top 8 and just leaving Nadu mirrors for like the rest of the tournament. You know, I think from the tournament success that it's had, from the other things kind of going on with it that are technically outside the realm of Magic, like other than physically playing the game, it just takes so long to do things. It's not deterministic. It's a miserable experience all around, you know. And this, again, probably wouldn't be that big of an issue if Nadu wasn't the best deck in the format, if it wasn't such a dominant deck in Modern. Now, of course, I think here lately, it's just kind of been like it's been a very good deck here lately. Of course, I think energy decks are doing a lot better online, on top of the fact that you can't execute the same kind of loops that you can with Nadu in paper. It's very hard to do in Magic. Arguably, on Magic Online, Nadu is an incredibly worse deck than it is in paper. That said, still manages to put up a reasonable amount of top 8s, still is the most played deck in the format, you know, and just in general, an annoyance to the format. So I would absolutely love to see this card go. I think it is going to go. It's been all but confirmed through, you know, WotC and like their, you know, Magic videos, or rather like their stream, where they said they weren't going to emergency ban Nadu. They were going to stick to their schedule. While that's not necessarily them saying Nadu is going to get banned on this, shut up. It is kind of weird that they are waiting till the, you know, essentially, you know, into the start of the Modern RCQ season, because they typically don't like to ban cards in the format that is being played in the RCQ season if it is going to, unless it is like dramatically unhealthy. And some could argue that it was already dramatically unhealthy, so they should have just banned it, and then when the list comes up, they just don't have any changes for Modern, because they're like, hey, like, we already made the changes. Or just not even have a ban list in general, and then just like figure it out there, like, okay, what formats are getting bans, and then they just release it, you know, right before the start of the RCQ season, and just try to be a little bit more flexible with their list. Of course, that didn't happen. We're waiting till the 26th. Nadu for sure is going to get banned. I don't see a world where this continues to exist the way that it is currently. You know, could they ban something else from the deck to maybe make it less consistent or less deterministic? That is quite the possibility. That said, I don't think that they want to take like the Storm players approach, or like the Amulet Titan approach to this, where we ban cards around what is actually causing the issue. I think the issue is Nadu. Either they have to find a way to kind of nerf it, which I think is a not very popular option, because then it kind of creates some confusion for players when they read the card how it's printed, and then there's an errata on a card, and it's like, well, that's not what this card says, and then it's just becomes like this huge thing where, like, yeah, your opponent doesn't have to necessarily accept that it's not how it works anymore. Like, they just have to now play by what this new errata is, and I think it could potentially create some feel bad moments that are just, like, in general, are not fun to kind of be a part of, whether you're the person having to make the judge call, whether you're the person that doesn't understand the change and how it works, or if you're the person that does understand the change and you're having to explain it to your opponent. In general, it just doesn't sound like fun. I think that, in that case, I think Nadu has to go. I think all the other cards that are in the deck, totally fine. I just think you have to get rid of the bird. Now, as far as anything not Nadu related, we probably have to talk about some of the other popular metagame decks. We have something like the Monoblock Necro decks, where they just get like all this life gain and kind of gets continue to do their thing with Necro Dominance and draw a bunch of cards. I don't think Shielder needs to be banned. I don't think Necro Dominance necessarily needs to be banned. What changes could you make to the deck? I don't know. That's kind of hard to, at least in that sense. Nadu I think is easy. I think it's almost like a slam dunk to get rid of it. As far as anything else that's available in the format, I think that Boros is starting to get a little out of hand. That said, how good will it be once Nadu is banned? We know that it's a very good deck right now, but how much better is it going to get? Is it going to even be that good after it? I would imagine it will be. I think that's probably one of the safest decks to actually build into, whether you're planning on playing against Nadu in an RCQ here in the next few weeks, or if you're looking to play like post-ban. I think it's just a very good deck to have access to play anyway. But really, in the grand scheme of things, we just don't know. I think that there is potentially some other Modern Horizons 3 cards that could get banned. I really am tired of kind of seeing the energy packages in a lot of these decks, but we'll kind of see how the player base reacts to, people getting to cast like 2-mana Wraths and be able to leave up like counter spells or do other kind of crazy stuff, or like everybody playing Phlages, things like that. But in general, I think Modern has specifically one problem, and it's not even the fact that, like with Pioneer, we have, a very polarizing deck that is followed shortly behind another very polarizing deck that is then far behind being followed by another polarizing deck that control over 50% of the metagame. And I think Nadu in paper is a deck that poses a lot of problems for like tournament logistics, on top of just also, that the physically playing of the games, and the fact that, again, a lot of people are just playing it like regardless of the fact that it's like kind of bad in online, and it still does very well. And it's a lot better in paper, and there's tons of people playing it, and you play 20-30 minutes over time. Maybe not every single round, but enough rounds to where, if Amalia drawing, 1 or 2 games is annoying, how is, 2 or 3 rounds of an event going, well over the time, not annoying? And imagine it for even bigger tournaments as well, where you have, 1,000 people playing in a tournament hall, and you have to get done by like a certain time. You start at 9 a.m. and then you're on like round 9, and you should be at like, we'll say like 6-7 o'clock, and it's like 10-11 o'clock. Like, that's just absolutely asinine to kind of keep people there that long. But, that's my thoughts, opinions, everything like that of the Modern format as well as the Pioneer format, everything like that. I think the overall state of both of these formats, obviously they're in pretty bad shape. Unique for like their own unique takes, or kind of what's going on here. I think Modern has a 1 deck problem right now, potentially a 2 deck problem, and I think that Pioneer absolutely has a 3 deck problem, where you have just this huge gap between 3 and 4, and heck, you're starting to even get a pretty big gap between 1 and 2, which is definitely not ideal for having a diverse format, because yes, you can play a lot of things in either format, but when players and like the pro players in general gravitate towards 2 or 3 different decks in the format, that's not really a good thing. As much as we want to say that decks are performing good because pro players are picking up, well, pro players are picking them up because it is a good deck. Where if someone like me could pick up Nadu and go win an RCQ, can you imagine what players like Sam Pardee and Simon Nielsen, players that actually played this deck, could do at like an RCQ or even like a higher level event. I mean, there's already some pretty good players that maybe weren't necessarily known for playing Nadu that have done very well in events because they know that the deck is very good, and there's no reason to not play the best deck in the format, and again, arguably one of the best modern decks of all time. I won't say it's the best modern deck of all time. I think there's a few other ones that are a lot more straightforward and probably close out the game a little bit better. But that said, I think that Nadu probably definitely belongs up there. What number? I don't know. That's a discussion that we could possibly have in the comments down below. But yeah, that's going to be this video. Hope you all enjoyed. Again, if you have not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me, where we talk mainly about the Modern and Pioneer format, and along with some other longer form videos, I do greatly appreciate the support. If you would do so in obliging me or things like that of subscribing to the channel. I'm going to go play some College Football 25. I've been looking forward to kind of diving back in and playing it. I'm going to play a bunch of it today. So, thank you all for watching. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you all in the next one.